Alright, so today I want to show you what I think may be my very world's first ball python. It's kind of funny, I was going through my collection today thinking, you know, I need to give all these snakes names, and I need to pick out a snake today to name. I'm going through every day naming all my snakes, and I actually picked out this snake and I started thinking, I wonder if someone actually produced this. Someone was actually asking me if I ever produced a world's first, and I never thought that I actually did. And this one is actually a scaleless head, 50% het caramel albino. So there's a 50% chance that it has one copy of the caramel albino gene. And I actually went over to Morphmarket and looked for a scaleless head het caramel, and no one has ever produced one. Pretty amazing. And kind of my ultimate end game for this project is to produce a totally scaleless visual caramel albino ball python. And it's kind of weird, I actually kind of accidentally got into this project. I went over on Morphmarket years ago and I was like, all right, I just want a really cheap, really big female snake, and I found these really two big females. They were huge, like almost 5,000 grams, the biggest ones over on Morphmarket, and the guy gave me a deal on two of them. I think I paid like $300 for the pair or something like that. Really crazy, and both of them were het for caramel albino, and I actually produced a whole bunch of hatchlings breeding a bunch of co-dominants, and everything that I produced from them was 50% het caramel albino, but I never kind of, you know, targeted producing a visual caramel albino. I thought after all these years, I'm just going to try it and breed a scaleless head to my het caramel albino, and then breed those back to the mom and see if I can actually work to produce a completely scaleless visual caramel albino. So this could be a world's first if it actually proves out to be het for caramel albino. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull that male out and give him a name and kind of show you some of the snakes that I'm working with on my scaleless caramel albino project. Alright, take a look at this ball python. At first glance, you're probably thinking, hey, that looks like just like a normal ball python. Nothing fancy about this one. As a matter of fact, when I bought my very first scaleless head, I felt like, you know, I think I bought it for, I think I paid like $1,100 for my scaleless head with no other genes in the mix. And that wasn't that long ago. It's really come down quite a bit, the whole scaleless head project. And essentially what the scaleless head is, if you actually look at the head on this one, you can see there's just a few scales missing from the top of the head, right behind the nose there. And essentially what that is if you actually take two scaleless heads and breed them together, you get a completely scaleless ball pythons with no scales on the snake. It's kind of a wild anomaly. It's like one of the new genes in the market. And kind of the interesting thing about all my scaleless head, normal looking snakes without any other genes in, is they have really crazy belly patterns. Look at the belly pattern on this guy. Really kind of jumbled up. And kind of the other thing weird about the scaleless head is that it almost feels like the skin and the texture is a little bit different than a regular ball python, almost like a little more bumpy. I don't know if you can see it on the video where it almost has little micro bumps on it. There's actually a micro scale which is similar to the scaleless head, and I think both of them kind of have this weird kind of like a micro, almost like a micro scale on this one. But the only difference between the scaleless head and the micro scale is if you make the super micro scale, you end up with a snake that has no heat pits on the mouth. So if you actually look really close at the mouth, if this one will actually hold still for you, right on the side of the mouth, I don't know if you can see it, it actually has a little heat pits, like little holes right on the tip of the nose. You can see those little heat pits. And if you actually make the super micro scale, it doesn't have the heat pits on the mouth, which is weird. It's just like they're completely gone. If you actually make the super scaleless head with two copies of the scaleless head, then you get a snake that is completely scaleless, but it still has the heat pits. That's kind of the difference between the micro scale and the scaleless project. As a matter of fact, this one is, when I first got into it, the micro scale was a lot more expensive than the scaleless head. And at first I thought they were kind of exactly the same until I really kind of wrapped my head around the differences between them. And the other thing that's really cool about the scaleless head that I found, if you actually mix it with other genes, a lot of times you get a lot more contrast and a brighter snake, even though you just have one copy of the scaleless head. It's pretty wild how it really brightens and enhances a lot of other genes. I actually have a scaleless head lesser that is really super bright. It is pretty amazing. Just the addition of one copy of the scaleless head. And I think for some reason when you add scaleless head to a snake, I think what it does is it kind of thins out the scales on the whole snake. You get kind of like a reduced number of scales that really lets a lot more color through. And the really weird thing is if you actually make the completely scaleless ball python, all the colors look completely different. You almost have to relearn all your morphs looking at scaleless. I actually did a video on the scaleless and some of the stuff that people are producing, and there hasn't been a whole bunch of stuff produced that is completely scaleless. And if you actually look at some of it, it doesn't even look like the original genes. You almost have to totally relearn ball pythons and all the genes going into the completely scaleless ball python. And the other thing I found is a lot of times you'll see a lot of flaming coming up the sides, and that seems to be another indication that you have the scaleless head. And the other cool thing, that if you're wondering if you have a scaleless head, they actually have a split vent scale, which is kind of interesting. If you look at the kind of the vent where they go to the bathroom underneath the snake, if I can get this guy to hold still, he's like squirming all over the place. And of course, you know, I try to put them out here in the bright lights and they're like, nah, I just want to run. So if you actually take a look at the scale, let's see if I can kind of wrap them around my arm right on the very bottom, right before the vent, right where they go to the bathroom. This scale right here, right by the spurs, you can see it's actually split into two scales. And in a normal ball python that's not a scaleless head, that scale is one single scale instead of split into two scales. And kind of the weird thing is, you know, I kind of heard the rumors that that was true, and a lot of people kind of denied it and didn't think it was true. And then after I produced a whole bunch of scaleless heads, I went through my collection, and every single scaleless head that I produced had a split vent scale, and all the non-scaleless heads had a single scale down by the vent. I thought that was kind of interesting. And they don't necessarily have to have scales missing from the head to be a scaleless head. Some of them are so subtle you can't even see the scales missing on top of the head. This is a pretty high expression scaleless head with quite a few scales. It looks kind of weird on top of the head. As a matter of fact, the very first male that I bought had a whole bunch of scales missing from the top of the head. It was almost like a bald head, and I paid a little bit extra because it was a high expression scaleless head. And I don't think it really matters once you produce the super if you start with a high expression or the low expression scaleless head with more or less scales missing from the head. So this one is 50% head caramel albino. As a matter of fact, I actually produced 3 of these. I was holding back 3 of them. I was like, all right, that's too many, and then I sold 1. So now I have 2 of them exactly like this, 2 males, and I have 2 females that are exactly like this. So if my odds are 50%, I figure if I hold back 2 of them, I could actually get 100% by holding back 2 50%. And essentially, if I actually produce, so for example, if I take this and breed it to that female and get a visual caramel albino scaleless head, I'll probably sell this one and keep the visual and kind of keep upping my game and selling off my extras. And if I actually can prove them that they're, you know, head caramel albino, then I can actually upgrade and kind of replace them as I go. So I've actually unloaded 1. As a matter of fact, I think I unloaded 1 male and 1 female because I needed to free up extra rack space. And that is the problem with kind of a limited collection. You get into these projects and you're like, all right, I need to hold back like 6 snakes for this project. And then you realize you don't really have enough rack space, and you start producing desert ghosts and clowns and all this stuff, and you kind of have to free up the rack space by selling off some of the older snakes in your project. This guy's finally calming down a little bit, getting not so head shy. Sometimes they start out super head shy, and it just takes a little handling under I think it's the bright lights that kind of freaks him out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give this guy a name. I have some names here in the jar. I'm going to pull a name out and finally name this guy. I bred him this year. As a matter of fact, the female that I bred this one to looks like she might lay some eggs. So here pretty soon, maybe in a couple months, I'll actually see if this guy is actually het for caramel albino. So this guy's new name is Boss. Alright, so I also wanted to show you my het caramel albino females. I have two females, 100% het caramel albino. This one actually went back on food, so I don't have much hope for her, because usually once you're breeding them and they go back on food, usually they don't lay. But look at how big she is. She is a really big monstrous snake. Probably, I think this is one of the biggest snakes in my collection. Look at how big she is. She is monstrous. This girl, when she lays eggs, she lays like between 13 and 15 eggs. I don't know if she'll lay or not. You know, going back on food usually is not a good sign here in the middle of the breeding season. Some of my snakes have already laid eggs and I've gotten some hatchlings, and usually when they go back on food, she's eaten like 3 rats, I'm thinking, in the last maybe couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. So I'm not sure that one's gonna go, but there's another one down here that's still off of food. This girl down here, she's another really big girl, and she's going into a shed too. So I'm hoping this one will lay, which would be pretty awesome. And usually after they shed, the pre-lay shed, this would be like 30 days or so before they lay eggs. So I'm hoping, cross your fingers on this one, they'll actually get a really big clutch of eggs. And if I do, and that male is 100% het caramel albino, it'll change from 50% to 100% if you can prove it out. And then I'll actually get visual caramel albinos. And this girl will produce so many eggs, I can just, you know, I can guarantee you on the first clutch we'll know if that one has a copy of the caramel albino or not. And it's kind of like a one-time thing. I'm taking that male, breeding it back to the female, just kind of, you know, for kicks, to, you know, kind of do this project as a side. And then if I can actually produce some visual caramel albinos, I'll go further down that road. Just something, you know, kind of, a lot of these projects, you have breedings that are just kind of like once in a lifetime, and then you move on from there. Sometimes you even sell the males and keep kind of improving and moving along your collections. And look at how deep in the shed she is. She is really deep, really super great eyes. Can't wait for this girl to lay a whole bunch of eggs. That'll be pretty awesome. Alright, so there you have it. Boss may actually be a world's first. A scaleless head, het caramel albino. If he actually proves out to be het caramel albino. And it's kind of hard on the world's first, because some people, you know, they actually have big operations and whole warehouses breeding ball pythons. And it's really hard to know if they actually produce some of these snakes. You know, sometimes you look over on Morphmarket and that's not the only place you need to look. Sometimes it's really hard to figure out if you actually did produce the world's first. As a matter of fact, I actually produced some triple hets, albino pied clowns, and I haven't seen any of those over on Morphmarket. And I was wondering if people actually produced the triple het with those 3 genes. Kind of an interesting mix. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.